September 11th, 2001. It's a date that doesn't just mark a point on a calendar, it represents a profound shift in global consciousness. For those who lived through it, the memory of where they were when they heard the news is etched permanently in their minds. The clear blue sky over New York City, shattered by an act of unimaginable horror, changed the world forever. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost in New York, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania, leaving behind a void of grief and questions that still resonate decades later. But surrounding this central tragedy are countless stories of what-ifs, stories of fate, chance, and sliding doors moments. These are the stories of individuals who were scheduled to be in the direct path of danger, only to be saved by a completely random, often mundane twist of events. A missed alarm clock, a last-minute change of travel plans, a nagging feeling. When these near misses happen to ordinary people, they become cherished family legends of luck. But when they happen to public figures, they become startling reminders that destiny plays no favorites. The world almost lost some of its most recognizable faces that day, individuals whose work has shaped music, film, and culture. Today, we explore the chilling stories of 14 famous people who narrowly escaped the 9/11 attacks. From actors who held tickets for the hijacked flights to public figures who were supposed to be having breakfast at the top of the World Trade Center, these narratives highlight the fragile thread upon which life hangs. 1. Seth MacFarlane. In 2001, Seth MacFarlane was known primarily as the creator of the then-fledgling animated series Family Guy. The show, known for its edgy humor, had already faced cancellation scares and was building its cult following. On the night of September 10th, MacFarlane had given a speech at his alma mater, the Rhode Island School of Design. The following morning, he was scheduled to return to Los Angeles. His booking was on American Airlines Flight 11, departing from Boston Logan Airport. MacFarlane, however, had spent the night out celebrating and drinking with colleagues and professors. Compounding his exhaustion was a mistake made by his travel agent, who had listed the flight's departure time as 8:15 a.m. instead of the actual 7:45 a.m. departure. When MacFarlane arrived at Logan Airport on the morning of September 11th, he was roughly 10 minutes late. The gate for Flight 11 had just closed. He was turned away and told he would have to wait for the next flight. Frustrated by the inconvenience, MacFarlane went to the airport lounge to wait and take a nap. About 45 minutes later, he awoke to a commotion. The airport screens began to display the horrific news: a plane had struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center. A short time later, he and the other passengers learned that the plane involved was Flight 11, the very flight he had missed by mere minutes. MacFarlane later reflected on the incident with chilling sobriety. He stated that the primary reason he survived was his hangover and general lateness. He acknowledged the grim reality that, had he been on time, his fate would have been sealed alongside the other passengers on Flight 11. The close call deeply affected him, yet he has also processed it through a lens of dark humor, noting that the incident taught him a lesson about punctuality, albeit a terrifying one. The architect of a comedy empire was saved by a common human failing: oversleeping after a night out. 2. Mark Wahlberg. Another Boston native with a ticket for American Airlines Flight 11 was actor Mark Wahlberg. By 2001, Wahlberg had successfully transitioned from his music career as Marky Mark to becoming a respected actor, having starred in films like Boogie Nights and Three Kings. He was scheduled to fly from his hometown of Boston to Los Angeles on Flight 11. However, just before the scheduled departure, Wahlberg's plans changed abruptly. He and his friends received a last-minute invitation to attend the Toronto International Film Festival. Deciding to make the trip to Canada first, they chartered a private plane and canceled their seats on Flight 11. This decision, likely made for professional networking or convenience, rerouted him away from certain tragedy. Like MacFarlane, Wahlberg only learned of the fate of Flight 11 after he was safely on the ground elsewhere. The news that the plane he was supposed to be on had initiated the attacks was profoundly shocking. Years later, Wahlberg sparked controversy with comments he made about the incident, suggesting that if he had been on the flight with his children, it wouldn't have went down like it did. This statement drew criticism from some victims' families who found it insensitive. Wahlberg later issued a sincere apology, acknowledging that his remarks were thoughtless and that speculating on such scenarios was inappropriate. He expressed deep regret and emphasized his sympathy for the victims. His story remains a powerful example of how quickly a routine travel decision can become a matter of life and death. 3. Michael Jackson. Perhaps one of the most astonishing near-miss stories involves Michael Jackson, arguably the most famous person on Earth in 2001. The King of Pop had just completed a pair of massive 30th anniversary celebration concerts at Madison Square Garden. The second concert took place on the night of September 10th. On the morning of September 11th, Michael Jackson was scheduled to attend a series of business meetings. The location for these meetings was at the top of one of the World Trade Center towers. However, following the concert and celebrations, Jackson stayed up late into the early morning hours talking with his mother, Catherine, and his sister, Rebby. Exhausted from the performance and the late conversation, Jackson simply overslept. The alarm clock didn't rouse him, and he missed his appointments entirely. Hours later, from his hotel room, he learned of the attacks unfolding just miles away at the exact location where he was supposed to have been. According to family accounts, including his brother Jermaine's memoir, Jackson credited his mother for saving his life. Had that conversation not run so late, had he not been so exhausted, he likely would have been in the tower when American Airlines Flight 11 struck. The thought of losing such a cultural icon in the attack adds another layer of surrealism to the day's events. Jackson was deeply affected by the tragedy and would go on to organize the United We Stand, What More Can I Give benefit concert in Washington, D.C. a month later. 4. Sarah Ferguson, Duchess of York. Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, was navigating her post-royal life through philanthropy and media appearances in 2001. Her charity, Chances for Children, had recently established its office headquarters in a location that symbolized global commerce and influence, the 101st floor of the North Tower of the World Trade Center. On the morning of September 11th, Ferguson was scheduled to be at her desk in that office. However, she had a prior commitment that morning, an interview with Matt Lauer at the nearby NBC studios. As often happens with television production, the interview ran slightly behind schedule. The Duchess was caught in morning traffic trying to get back downtown to her office when the first plane hit the tower. Her staff was present in the building, but Ferguson herself was delayed by only a matter of minutes. Had the interview finished on time, she very likely would have been in the elevator or already on the 101st floor, far above the impact zone, where escape became impossible for nearly everyone. The near miss left a permanent mark on Ferguson. She later revealed that in the aftermath, she created an alter ego named Little Red, a character she used to process the trauma and to communicate with children affected by tragedy. The experience solidified her commitment to her charity work, driven by the stark understanding of how closely she had come to being a victim herself. 5. Rob Lowe. Rob Lowe's brush with 9/11 didn't happen on the day of the attacks, but 11 days prior. It's a story that highlights the chilling preparation undertaken by the terrorists. Lowe, then starring in the highly popular series The West Wing, was a frequent flyer. On August 22, 2001, he took a routine flight from Washington Dulles Airport to Los Angeles. The flight itself was unremarkable. Lowe noted in his autobiography that he didn't interact much with the other passengers. It wasn't until after 9/11 that the true nature of that flight became clear. Lowe learned that he had been flying alongside several of the men who would later hijacked American Airlines Flight 77, the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. The flight he was on had been a dry run for the operation. He later received notice from the Attorney General of Maryland informing him that he would need to be prepared to give evidence against Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker. Lowe realized in hindsight that his mundane flight experience was actually observation of the final stages of a terrorist plot. The thought that he had shared air and space with the future perpetrators, completely unaware, was profoundly disturbing to him. 6. Larry Silverstein. For real estate developer Larry Silverstein, the World Trade Center was more than just an office folio. In a highly publicized deal, Silverstein had secured a 99-year lease on the entire complex just 6 weeks before the attacks, in late July 2001. Silverstein had a strict daily routine. Every single morning, he would meet with tenants and conduct business over breakfast at the Windows on the World restaurant, located on the 107th floor of the North Tower. On the morning of September 11th, he was scheduled to be there as usual. However, on that particular morning, his wife, Clara, intervened. She insisted that he break his routine to attend a medical appointment with his dermatologist. He initially argued against it, wanting to keep his work commitments, but ultimately relented to his wife's persistence. While Silverstein was at the doctor's office, the attacks began. The decision forced upon him by his wife saved his life. Tragically, Silverstein Properties lost 4 employees in the attack. Furthermore, his 2 adult children, Roger and Lisa, also worked at the complex and were running late that morning, narrowly avoiding the disaster themselves. Silverstein, who lost his massive investment but gained his life, would spend the next 2 decades dedicated to rebuilding the site. 7. Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick, the CEO of financial services firm Cantor Fitzgerald, faced one of the most devastating personal and professional losses of 9/11. Cantor Fitzgerald's offices occupied floors 101 through 105 of the North Tower, the very top of the building, directly in the path of Flight 11's impact. Howard Lutnick should have been in his office when the plane hit. However, September 11, 2001 coincided with a significant milestone in his family life, his son's first day of kindergarten. Lutnick chose to delay going to work so he could personally take his son to school. This parental duty placed him outside the tower when the attack occurred. While Lutnick survived, the cost to his company was catastrophic. Cantor Fitzgerald lost 658 of its 960 New York employees that day, representing nearly a quarter of all victims in the World Trade Center collapse. Among the dead was Lutnick's own brother, Gary Lutnick. Howard Lutnick became one of the most prominent public faces of grief and resilience, dedicating himself to rebuilding his company and supporting the families of his lost employees through the Cantor Fitzgerald Relief Fund. 8. Patti Austin. Grammy-winning jazz and R&B singer Patti Austin was booked to fly on United Airlines Flight 93 from Newark to San Francisco on September 11th. Flight 93 would become famous for the passenger revolt that prevented the hijackers from reaching their intended target in Washington, D.C., crashing instead into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Austin was in New York to perform at the Michael Jackson tribute concerts on September 7th and 10th. She was scheduled to take Flight 93 home the following morning. However, just before she was due to fly, Austin received devastating news. Her mother, who lived in San Francisco, had suffered a severe stroke. Without hesitation, Austin changed her travel plans, taking an earlier flight on September 10th to be by her mother's side. The family emergency, while tragic in itself, pulled her off the manifest of Flight 93. When she learned what happened to the flight she was supposed to be on, she was overwhelmed by the duality of fate. Grieving her mother's health crisis while simultaneously processing her own miraculous escape from a historical tragedy. 9. Ian Thorpe. In 2001, Australian swimmer Ian Thorpe, known as the Torpedo, was one of the biggest athletic stars in the world. He was in New York City on vacation. On the morning of September 11th, Thorpe decided to do what millions of tourists do: visit the observation deck of the World Trade Center. He left his hotel and was heading toward Lower Manhattan in a taxi. Partway through the journey, he realized he had forgotten his camera. Wanting to capture the iconic views from the top, he instructed the taxi driver to turn around and take him back to his hotel to retrieve it. He was back in his hotel room when he turned on the television and saw footage of the North Tower on fire. He watched in real time as the second plane hit the South Tower. Had he not forgotten his camera, had he continued on his original path, Thorpe would likely have been inside one of the towers at the exact moment the attacks began. The simple act of forgetfulness saved him from a terrifying ordeal. 10. Jackie Chan. Global martial arts superstar Jackie Chan had a project in development that in hindsight seems eerily prescient. The film was titled Nosebleed, and Chan was set to play a window washer at the World Trade Center who uncovers a terrorist plot. The production schedule called for filming to begin in New York City. Specifically, there were scenes scheduled to be shot at and around the base of the World Trade Center on the morning of September 11th. However, the production encountered a common hurdle in filmmaking: script problems. The screenplay wasn't ready on time and key elements were still being reworked. Due to these creative delays, the start date for filming in New York City was pushed back. Chan was not in New York City on September 11th because the movie he was supposed to be making there wasn't ready to shoot. The project was immediately and permanently canceled following the attacks, given its now unthinkable subject matter. 11. Gabure Sidibe. Years before she received an Academy Award nomination for her breakout role in the film Precious, Gabure Sidibe was a college student in New York City. She attended classes at the Borough of Manhattan Community College, or BMCC. The BMCC campus is located very close to the World Trade Center complex, specifically Fitterman Hall, which was situated directly across from 7 World Trade Center. On the morning of September 11th, Sidibe had a class scheduled. However, like many college students, she overslept and decided to skip her morning class. This decision kept her away from the campus when the attacks occurred. Fitterman Hall was heavily damaged when the 47-story 7 World Trade Center building collapsed later that afternoon. The building ultimately had to be demolished and rebuilt due to the extensive contamination and structural failure caused by the collapse of the Twin Towers. Sidibe's decision to hit the snooze button kept her clear of the chaos and debris that engulfed her campus. 12. Michael Lomonaco. Chef Michael Lomonaco was the culinary director for the iconic Windows on the World restaurant, located on the 107th floor of the North Tower. It was a high-pressure job that required him to be present early in the morning. On September 11th, Lomonaco planned to arrive at his usual time. However, he remembered that he had a damaged pair of eyeglasses. He decided to make a quick stop at the LensCrafters located in the World Trade Center's underground concourse to see if he could get them repaired before heading up to the restaurant. He arrived at the concourse around 8:15 a.m. While waiting for the repair, he heard a tremendous explosion reverberate through the complex at 8:46 a.m. The lights flickered and debris began to fall. Lomonaco was evacuated from the concourse level. He escaped the complex, but because he was delayed on the ground floor, he survived. Had he gone straight to his office on the 107th floor as planned, escape would have been impossible. Tragically, 79 of his employees and 91 restaurant guests present that morning perished. 13. Jim Pierce. Jim Pierce, then a managing director for the insurance corporation Aon Corporation, not only worked in the South Tower, but also happened to be the cousin of President George W. Bush. Aon's offices occupied multiple high floors in the South Tower. On the morning of September 11th, Pierce was scheduled to host a large business conference for his company. The original meeting location was set for a large conference room within Aon's offices high up in the South Tower. However, as preparations were finalized, it became clear that the guest list had grown too large for the originally assigned room. A last-minute decision was made to move the entire conference to a larger venue in the Millennium Hilton Hotel, located across the street from the towers. Pierce and his colleagues were safely in the hotel when United Airlines Flight 175 struck the South Tower, impacting many of the floors where Gayon's offices were located. The logistical inconvenience of needing more space directly led to his survival. 14. Gwyneth Paltrow, the ripple effect. Gwyneth Paltrow's story is different. She was not personally in danger, but she was unknowingly part of someone else's near-miss story, illustrating the incredible ripple effect of chance. On the morning of September 11th, a woman named Laura Lundstrom was running late to her job at the World Trade Center. She rushed out of her apartment building and jaywalked across the street to catch her train. As she did, a silver SUV came speeding around the corner and nearly hit her. Both the driver and Lundstrom slammed on their brakes, stopping just in time. Startled and a little shaken, Lundstrom recognized the driver as Gwyneth Paltrow. This brief, heart-stopping encounter delayed Lundstrom by only a few seconds. But in that short span of time, the doors of her subway train closed. She missed it. Forced to wait for the next train, she arrived in Lower Manhattan just after the first plane had hit. Had she made that initial train, had she not been delayed by Paltrow's car, Lundstrom would have been at her desk on the 77th floor of the South Tower when it was struck. Paltrow only learned of her role in Lundstrom's survival years later, a story that highlights how our smallest, most random interactions can have consequences beyond our imagination. Conclusion: 14 stories of fame, fortune, and fate. A missed flight, a doctor's appointment, a forgotten camera, a late script. For every survivor of September 11th, there is a story of a seemingly insignificant choice that made all the difference. While we are drawn to these stories of celebrity near misses because they involve familiar names, they ultimately serve as proxies for the thousands of similar stories belonging to ordinary New Yorkers, office workers, and first responders whose lives were also spared by chance. But for every story of a fortunate escape, we must remember the nearly 3,000 stories that ended in tragedy. The empty chairs at dinner tables, the calls that never came, and the heroes who ran into the buildings when everyone else was running out. The legacy of September 11th is not found in the what-ifs of those who survived, but in the memory of those who were lost and the resilience of those who stayed behind to rebuild. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories compelling, please consider subscribing for more content that explores history, legacy, and survival. We will never forget.